Hello all, this is James Johnson, aka Sulfur Blade, and I am here to talk to you about some politics and the crazy shit that's going on in the United States currently. I've got many trains of thought that I want to try to explore in this video, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it coherently without rambling off on one topic and forgetting about others. But I will give it my best go. First off, I want to talk about the Floyd situation. I think it's funny. I think everyone in the United States, whether you're black, white, green, yellow, orange, or purple, or, yeah, I said orange. Even the orange man thought that it was very bad. And I think it was very bad. And anyone watching that video would have thought it was very bad. It was clear and cut police brutality. It was, and the guy got fired instantaneously. He's had criminal charges brought against him instantaneously. Donald Trump sent the FBI to Minnesota within 3 hours of it happening. The governor weighed in on it within like hours of it happening, and the police chief of the place fired him within like an hour. He was in jail almost instantaneously. But yet we have these crazy protests. Well, I don't think the protests are crazy. What I think is the rioting is crazy. And those are two very different issues. However, I think the protests, I have a little bit of an issue with the protests. It is every American's right to protest, and I support their right to protest, but it is also my right to comment about what they're doing, and so I'm exercising that right. So I find it interesting that we have this narrative that is force-fed and crammed down our throat. And that is that police are especially what's the word I'm looking for? That police who overstep their authority somehow magically always do it with blacks and never with whites. Now, this particular piece of information I have showing in front of you, it doesn't show you whether or not a police officer overstepped his authority. So this is simply a statistic that shows you the number of people who were shot to death by a police officer. Now, that doesn't mean that the police officer wasn't within his rights to do so in that situation. And it also doesn't show whether or not a police officer wasn't within his rights to do so within that situation. But what we can see is that a fair number of white people get shot to death by police officers. Approximately double that of black individuals. However, there is definitely a disparity between the number of white individuals that live in the United States compared to the number of black individuals that live in the United States. So if 2-to-1 whites are dying to blacks, but there's like 4-to-1 whites that live in the United States compared to blacks, then there is a statistical anomaly. However, blacks, unlike whites, tend to live in some of the poorest and worst neighborhoods in the United States, which counteracts that statistical anomaly and explains that statistical anomaly. When you live in poor, downtrodden, bad neighborhoods, certain things tend to happen, right? Now, I kind of digress on this subject. The main point that I want to bring up is, when is the last time you've seen a white person being shot and killed by a police officer on national media? When's the last time the national media has posted all over the place about a white guy who was shot wrongly? Now, granted, this particular example with Mr. Floyd was caught by a cell phone from a bystander who was watching on, and thank God for that. But I'm going to say that police brutality is not some magical corner that black individuals have cornered the market on. I would like to just point out something that happened in Canada this year. And what happened in Canada is nowhere near the level of horrible that happened to Mr. Floyd. Mr. Floyd lost his life. But on Star Wars Day, in Canada, some poor young lady, a young lady, maybe between 18 and 21, I don't remember her age, but she was young, was convinced by her employer to dress up in a very expensive stormtrooper costume outside of his Galactic Cantina bar. Part of the costume is a plastic blaster rifle. Well, evidently Canada has a law on its books that toys can't look realistic. And evidently a black stormtrooper blaster rifle looks realistic. I mean, it's being held by a person in a stormtrooper costume. It's like people have never watched Star Wars in their life. I find that hard to believe. Even the most anti-sci-fi person has probably caught one or two glimpses of Star Wars and could probably tell you what the hell a stormtrooper is, and could probably explain to you that piece of plastic, that black piece of plastic in his hand, is the stormtrooper blaster rifle. And so when cops came and swarmed this poor young lady and put her on the ground, and, well, they didn't necessarily break her nose, but she had a bloody nose after the incident, and she was crying and in hysteria as a swarm of cops showed up pointing shotguns and other weapons at her, and considered her non-compliant because she couldn't manage to kneel down quick enough in a stormtrooper costume that's not designed to kneel in the first place. But I digress. Even in Canada, a place that most Americans would think have, they have the Mounties, they have the best police in the world, they're the nicest people in the world, you still have police craziness that makes your head spin. How does common sense not explain to these police officers that show up on the scene that this is a person wearing a stormtrooper costume? But yet they leveled shotguns and everything else at this poor young lady and treated her like she was the worst criminal in the world. Of course, they didn't know that she was a white girl. It could have been a black man in that costume, right? And then the police would have been justified. No, bullshit. There is no special market share that black people have on police stupidity. I don't believe that. I believe that the special market share of black men that end up on the news being killed by police officers is because they are black men, and it is good for the news. It's good for their bottom dollar, or it's good for their Democrat allies who want to use those stories for political purposes. But, not enough people have that type of common sense, evidently, in the United States, as there's people running around burning people's buildings to the ground in the middle of a pandemic, which, granted, is a whole nother ball of wax. I don't quite believe in the shutdown for the COVID, but you know what? I think people should stay home if they're living in these cities right now and not become looky-loos, or not wonder, well, maybe I should take part in the protests and then get caught up in the mob mentality and end up doing something that they're going to regret for the rest of their lives. If you live in any of these big cities and you're thinking about going and taking part in the protest, don't. Stay home. If there was a situation to stay home, it's for this crap, not for COVID. But I digress. So let's transition over to the next one here. Many claim extremists are sparking protest violence, but which extremists? Indeed, which extremists? So, politicians will be politicians. The Democratic governor of Minnesota and the Democratic mayor of Minneapolis will have you believe that far-right activists are behind the violence. In fact, the mayor of St. Paul claimed that the majority of people they arrested were from out of state. However, different reports came in from the Associated Press saying that most of the people that were in jail were actually from Minnesota. So do you believe the Associated Press's claim that the majority of people in the jail cells are from Minnesota, or do you believe the mayor of St. Paul, who says they're mostly from out of state? I don't know. I don't know which to believe. The AP lately hasn't been a very credible reporting source. Yeah, that's right. I said lately the AP hasn't been a very credible reporting source. In fact, most media hasn't been very credible reporting sources for the last 10 to 15 years, ever since they stopped reporting the news and started to become political commentary machines. That's the media. Whether or not you believe it or not, that is true. When Trump made the claim that fake news is fake news, he was spot on the money. News is not news anymore. However, is there a way that we can know if the extremists who are egging on the violence? So let's be clear. The initial windows, the initial bricks, the initial fires that were started in these various different cities across the country, they were certainly done by an outside influence group trying to use this situation for some sort of means. What their motive is behind why they're doing this is yet to be seen. But do we know if they're far right, or do we know that they're far left? We don't. Not for sure. However, what we do know, and I don't want to, I do want to take a side, actually. Why? Because my tribe that I've been put into Now, I'm going to stress that I have been placed into this tribe by all those around me who have pushed me into the conservative tribe. I considered myself a moderate. I considered myself a person who could look one way or look the other way, weigh the pros and the cons. Back in the 80s, maybe even part of the 90s, I was a moderate. I didn't completely slurp up the slop of any particular party. I would look at the individual topics, and then I would look at the individual parties and how they would deal with said topic, and I would pick the party that best dealt with that individual topic. See, I don't believe in platforms. I don't believe in we put these issues into this box and that makes you this tribe. Or we put these issues into this box and that makes you this tribe. I think that's a bunch of bullshit. I think people are individuals, and as an individual should use his fucking brain and think for his goddamn self. However, I'm a little old-fashioned that way. There's a lot of people that no longer use their brain. They let the group, their group, think for them. If their group condemns whatever, then they're on board with that. If their group is all for whatever, then they're on board with that. And it's very easy to understand what group some people are in. If you go, I wonder, is there a comment thing on here? No comments. Okay, well, if there would have been comments, I could check some of the other ones. Anyway, let's continue my train of thought about which is which. So I tend to lean towards it actually being Antifa, and this is why. Because Antifa has actually demonstrated an ability to coordinate and have demonstrated a method of operation, or a modus operandi. And they did this in Portland, Oregon. They were caught doing this in Portland, Oregon. This is their shtick. This is the way they operate. This is the way we know that they operate because they did it before. They will set up bricks ahead of time. They will hide guns ahead of time. And this is what these mayors and governors and local officials are saying are happening. That doesn't mean that some right-wing group couldn't have become more organized and seen what Antifa did and decide that it was a good idea. That certainly is possible. However, why? Why is my question. This is the last part of my argument I'm going to weigh in on for this particular topic. Is the left or is the right? The left, we know, is a group that loves social justice. They are a group that loves to put people in boxes. They have the tribal mentality. They believe that certain groups are part of their base. And if you go against the group, but you're supposed to be part of the group, like who are some examples? Ruben. Reuben, gay white man. He came out of the closet and he declared himself conservative. He was canceled. The mob on the internet came after him. That's how the left operates. They cancel those that sway away from the group. So, what is their group? They believe black Americans are their group. Who died? Mr. Floyd. What color was Mr. Floyd? He was a black American. I don't see benefits from the right to burn down cities. The right is the things that we're labeled for, the evil things we get labeled for is our support of big business, our love of money, our what's some other evil things that the right gets labeled for. Well, lately, our freedom of speech, right? Somehow the right has become the party of the freedom of speech. The freedom of thought, the freedom of expression, of not censoring shit. So of these two opposing ideologies, which one would make more sense? To burn down cities? To burn down businesses? You think the right would want to run around burning down businesses? Just doesn't seem to make sense from a right-wing extremist point of view. Why are we going to rile up black Americans in an election year? Why would the right rile up the black Americans during an election year? The left is the group that would believe if we riled up black Americans in an election year, they're sure to vote for the left because that's how they think. They think with this type of thought process. So what is the motive for this craziness going on out there? To win the election. It's really that simple. This loss of so much property, businesses that have burnt to the ground. In fact, there's been more deaths that have come out of this. There's been shop owners that have been beaten. I mean, the craziness that's going on. And who are the people who are willing to jump in once the instigation has been made, right? So who went out there to protest? Likely black Americans. Not all black Americans are part of the left. I'm got a individual enough thought process to know that there's plenty of Americans that have their own individual thought process and don't side with the left. But the left is the group that believes all black Americans are their right. It's their inherent group, and if they move from the left, then they are canceled, right? So you can't leave the group. You have to stay within it. So who would go out and protest Mr. Floyd's issue? Probably a lot of black Americans. And it could be black Americans on either political spectrum. But which ones are going to let their emotions run wild? And you might think that I'm being hyperbolic or I'm being overly dramatic when I say that the left is the more likely group to let their emotions run wild and go and jump in and start throwing bricks through the window after some random Joe Blow threw the first brick through the window, and now a bunch of the left individuals that are there, and they're angry, and they let their passion and their left way of thinking. I'm telling you that people on the far left have a mob mentality. If a brick is thrown, they're going to start throwing bricks too. I truly believe that. So, do I think it's conservatives out there throwing bricks through windows? No. Do I think there could be some conservative black Americans that went out there to protest initially and do so peacefully? Absolutely. But the breakdown between the conservative and the non-conservative black Americans who were protesting peacefully and then turned to non-peaceful protests, I'm sure it was the left portion of that base that jumped on the bandwagon and started to embrace the chaos. Now, are they at fault for doing so? You bet your ass they're at fault. I don't care if their brains work that way. I don't care if left people are more passionate and are more likely to jump on their more likely to act out in anger or to not think before acting. I don't give a shit. I really don't. Because I'm a conservative. I'm going to think before leaping. I'm going to think before acting. I'm not going to do something stupid like this. Do I think they should have the book thrown at them? Absolutely. Why? Oh. Which this leads into, why would Joe Biden bail out protesters in Minneapolis? You know, Joe Biden and his campaign are actively bailing people out of jail in Minneapolis. I'm not shitting you. That is happening. That is the truth. That is really happening. And it's because they know it's their base. They know that the left acts and behaves this way. So there it is. There is kind of my full circle explanation of why I truly believe that this is Antifa and not some right-wing group. It's because of the level of organization. I think Antifa already is this level of organized. It's happened in too many cities. I think if it was I think most right-wing extremist groups that would operate in this manner don't have the level of organization required to hit this many towns, this many cities simultaneously. If it was just Minneapolis, maybe that argument could have been made. But because it's happened in New York, Los Angeles, Minneapolis, Atlanta, San Diego, or Portland, Seattle, it just strikes me as far too organized. It's definitely it definitely feels to me like it's coming from the extreme left. And it definitely feels like it's because of the upcoming election. They know that they're going to lose to Donald Trump. So they're desperately trying to throw a Hail Mary to figure out a way to make Trump look bad, or to rile up black Americans so they vote for Joe Biden. It's ultimately what I think this is. Now, let's move on to Trump versus Twitter. Oh boy. So I want to say I applaud our good president in his attempts to stand up for conservatives on the internet. Just like I want to applaud Mr. Trump for his attempts to stand up for those in the cities that are currently burning across the United States. The president doesn't have a lot of authority to do stuff in Minneapolis. It's pretty much the cut and dry of it, right? The president doesn't have a lot of authority to do anything in, Los Angeles, Atlanta, New York. These things need to be handled by local politicians. And sadly, in a lot of these instances, the local politicians are progressive Democrats who, for whatever reason, seem to be incompetent or just not able to act, to protect, to, in Minneapolis, they actually abandoned a police precinct, which is just unheard of. Rudy Giuliani came on and onto Fox News and made some comments that a lot of people on the left probably would have took very offensive. And a lot of people on the right would have been like, yeah, you're absolutely right. But his claims, Rudy Giuliani's claims, is that he, as a conservative governor, or not governor, but mayor of New York, he never would have let these riots happen because the first person to throw a brick would have been in jail. The next person to throw a brick would have been in jail. He would have instantly had his police out there, and they would have been on this. They wouldn't have let it spun out of control. And, I kind of believe him. When you think about the differences between conservatives and progressive Democrats, is conservatives are about the rule of law, right? You can see it firsthand when we talk about illegal immigrants. Illegal immigrants, the president's all over trying to get the illegal immigrants arrested and deported. They violated the rule of law, and he's got ICE running around trying to take care of that. And who's actively fighting against ICE? Progressive Democrats in sanctuary cities. I don't know what it is, but Democrats seem to have some sort of, and I don't want to say all Democrats, but there are certainly some Democrats that are a bit more extremely left, and they tend to be called progressive Democrats, that they seem to be a little anti-rule of law. Almost like, I'm going to have to do something awfully really bad in my eyes before I'm going to start to consider you a criminal, before I could possibly, exercise my authority to deal with you. And seeing all my fellow Minnesotians out there so upset about Mr. Floyd, and I can understand your issues and your thoughts and your anger, and I don't really want to arrest you for being angry, and you burned down that police precinct, but you were justified in doing it. This is the way they think. It's like we can't arrest our angry fellow Minnesotians for doing these horrible things because, well, they're my voter base. They're the people I cater to get elected. And if I was to arrest them, maybe it wouldn't be so good for my next election. Well, there's something progressive Democrats need to think about, is those shops that got burnt down, how many of them were owned by Black Americans? A lot of them. How many of those Black Americans are going to think twice about voting for you a mayor who took no action and did not protect their businesses. And the next Republican that comes along who claims they will take action and protect their businesses all of a sudden becomes a much more viable candidate, doesn't he? So yeah, I tend to believe that Rudy Giuliani would have acted a bit differently than the current mayor of Minneapolis. Most definitely. And when you see President Trump throwing around Antifa being labeled a terrorist organization, you get a sense that, well, I get a sense that our president's frustrated. Our president is frustrated that he is, quote unquote, the most powerful person in the world that really can't do anything, right? He wants to appear strong, and he wants to appear to be on top of it. You know, he sent the FBI there after, you know, what happened to Floyd. Within 3 hours, he had the FBI out there. That was him appearing strong and showing that he cared about this issue, right? That was an incredibly quick response by the FBI and the president. However, there's not much that the president can do about these riots in Minnesota. He's sent the National Guard to all of these cities. You know, he's authorized the National Guard, and that's the extent of what he can do. He can talk big, right? And he tried to talk big, and then Twitter, of course, you know, jumped on his tweets as being, you know, glorifying violence. When he made a comment to the sort of once the looting starts, the shooting starts, which there's a lot of truth to that. Historically, once looting starts, business owners start shooting, and a lot of looters have been killed by business owners, and it's actually within a business owner's right to defend their property. They are legally justified to shoot a looter. So when Trump says something like that, I don't think he's attempting to glorify violence. I think he's attempting to instill a little bit of fear into any looter that may have heard his words, and think twice about whether or not they should loot in the future, whether or not they should continue to press their luck with looting, knowing that it's, well, a dangerous profession, right? So I think that Mr. Trump is frustrated, and he has the limited amount of things that he can do, which are mainly him saying things from a pulpit. Well, he did declare Antifa a terrorist organization, which is a different ball of wax. And then he has started his war with Twitter, which is, again, a different ball of wax. Now, I want to kind of dive into both of these topics, because while I think Trump has the greatest of reasonings, and I think he has the best intentions, I'm worried what could transpire if these issues actually become fully realized. So if the federal government really starts to go after Twitter and or Facebook and or YouTube, which I think is long overdue. I think it's long overdue that somebody in government stop the censorship of social media and starts to hold social media to the account that they are not a publisher, they are a platform, they are a town square, they're not in the business of saying whose opinion is right and whose opinion is wrong. That's not what social media is supposed to be doing. That's why they have these quote-unquote protections. However, if Trump manages to get his way and the lawsuits start to come, then social media may start to operate very differently. And as a result, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter could look and operate in a far different manner, and one that might not be as nice to the end user. So I definitely agree with Trump's reasons for acting. I'm worried where we get to at the end of the road. So for now, I'm going to support our president, and I'm going to have enough faith in him that he will know how far to push it. That's all I can do, is have enough faith that he will know how far to push it before it ends up a bad deal for us, the little people, on the other side of the social media equation. Because ultimately he's trying to stand up for us, the quote-unquote conservative consumer or user of social media. And I appreciate that. But I most certainly am a little bit worried that Pandora's box could end up being opened, and it could turn out really bad for us. And the same thought process goes towards the labeling of Antifa as a terrorist organization. So what keeps Antifa from simply relabeling? Nothing, right? They can just call themselves something else. And then what? When they become Coca-Cola, are we going to arrest them as if they're Antifa? When they stop waving a flag, are we going to arrest them as Antifa? And then, okay, so maybe it makes sense to continue to hold them to account as being Antifa, right? What if somebody else very similar has been declared to be Antifa, but they weren't Antifa and they weren't anti-Coca-Cola? You know, they just happened to fit the mold, and now they get caught in the crossfire as the witch hunt for Antifa happens. I could see several people ending up in that situation. And then if you're, quote-unquote, a terrorist organization, what about those who support you? What about the... I'm not going to say I'm a big fan of Don Lemon or Chris Como. They're not some of my favorite news individuals by any stretch of the imagination. But how far out of the stretch of reality is it to say, hey, Don Lemon has supported Antifa, because it's on the news. He's supported Antifa, as has Chris Como. Are they now conspirators? Can they be arrested? Can they be gone after? Because they have some six degrees of connection to Antifa? Or what about the people being bailed out of jail right now in Minneapolis by Joe Biden? Is he supporting Antifa because he bailed out members of Antifa? Did he know he was bailing out members of Antifa? No, he knew he was bailing out left-leaning individuals who got into trouble while protesting in Minneapolis. But some of them were Antifa, therefore Joe Biden assisted Antifa, and then the president comes and arrests or has Joe Biden arrested because he's supporting terrorists. So this is the type of rabbit hole we could end up going down because of this declaration of Antifa as a terrorist group. And while on the onset, I agree with the declaration. I understand why Trump is doing it. I understand that he feels like he has limited ways of affecting change in those cities, and he wants to be able to do something more. Where does more take us? Of course, this is me thinking like an individual. This is not me thinking like a member of a tribe. And for the love of God, I wish that Americans would stop putting themselves in a shoebox, would stop calling themselves a feminist. Because feminism is bad. Back in the 1980s, I would have called myself a feminist because feminism stood up for good things. They supported things that were sensible and logical. Now feminism is a bunch of freaking lunatics. They've taken women's rights and turned it into women's superiority. How can we make women superior to men is ultimately what feminism is now. It's not about equality between the genders. It's gone way past equality of the genders. And so when you willingly throw yourself into a tribe and you willingly start to think like the tribe, and you willingly take on the mob mentality, and you're listening to me right now, and I'm telling you to stop, will you stop? Will you try to start thinking like an individual? Orange Man is not bad. Orange Man is bad if Orange Man does something that truly offends you, the individual, not you, the member of the tribe. Just because so-and-so got upset about what Trump said, did it really upset you? Start thinking like a goddamn individual. I implore everyone in the United States, or the world for that matter, because this is not just a problem that rests within the good old US of A. This is a problem all over the place. Europe, Australia. All Western nations suffer from the Marxist ideologues. And I'm going to say that with a caveat, right? Do I believe that there's some great organization of Marxists that have uniquely crafted this expert plan of how to alter the psyches of people all over Western society to then use them against Western society for the purposes of promoting socialist and communist agendas? No, I'm not that level of conspiracy theorist. No. When I say the Marxist ideologue, I don't mean that as if there's some Illuminati group that's making it happen. I mean it from the point of view that it's happening. Not because there's some evil group out there trying to make it happen. No, I say it from the fact that it is clearly, unintentionally happening. And whether you want to deny it or not is up to you. Anyway, I do these political rambles every now and then to, I guess, remind my channel and remind those new to my channel that I'm a crazy conservative nut job, and you might want to unsubscribe now that you know who the real me is. Or you can continue to subscribe if you think like an individual and you heard what I said. Maybe you disagreed with some of what I said. Maybe you agreed with some of what I said. Maybe you agreed with all of what I said. Maybe I'm part of your tribe, right? Maybe I'm not part of your tribe. But if you don't agree with anything I said from your own individual point of view, not because of the point of view of your tribe, but your personal point of view, then go ahead and unsubscribe. It's not a big deal. Again, I do this as a hobby, right? But yeah, I guess that's where I will end this episode. Anyway, I'm James Johnson, aka Sulfur Blade. Thank you for listening to me rant. Hopefully you're having a good day. Hopefully you're staying safe. Hopefully you're staying away from these protests. And hopefully you're finding a way to work and make some money during the COVID hysteria. Yeah. Anyway, again, I'm James Johnson, aka Sulfur Blade. This is my content. Hopefully you're enjoying it. If so, please leave a like and subscribe. And until the next time, all, peace.